Is it time to worry about the state of the Baltimore Ravens offensive line after their early free agency losses? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we are everywhere for you, bringing you 5 days a week of Ravens content, Monday through Friday. Plus, also, we bring you other forms of bonus content like live streams, bonus episodes, and a lot more. So tell a friend, tell a family member we are available for them to talk Ravens football whenever the opportunity arises. And that is every single weekday plus more for us here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are back, midweek edition of Locked On Ravens. We have a couple of conversation points today. In the first part of the show, we're going to be talking about the state of the Ravens offensive line, because I know a lot of people are starting to get a little worried. I've seen the conversations throughout social media. So we're going to talk about it. Is it time to worry? Is it time to panic about the Ravens and the state of their offensive line, with it being just a week over the start of the tampering period and free agency? We'll also talk a bit more about a couple of housekeeping notes of moves the Ravens made yesterday, a re-signing and actually bringing back a familiar face. Then we have a special guest today. We're going to be talking with Mike Sando of The Athletic. He covers the NFL for The Athletic, worked at ESPN for a really long time, 12 years over there. So very accomplished. And we're going to be talking with him about all things Ravens, what happened in the AFC Championship game, kind of talk about what he saw in that, obviously the Derrick Henry signing, and a lot more, as well as the Ravens outlook there. So let's first talk. It'll just be me in the first segment. Then we'll have Mike on for the second and the third segments. So let's start with the offensive line, the state of the Ravens offensive line. Now, we do know that it's Tyler Linderbaum and Ronnie Stanley who are the two remaining starters from 2023. Other than that, you're looking at all new faces. John Simpson gone to the Jets. He signed there. Kevin Zeitler gone to the Lions. He signed there. And Morgan Moses in a trade goes to the Jets as well. Now, Simpson got 2 years, $18 million, so $9 million per season. A little bit rich for John Simpson, in my opinion. But hey, you know what? Good for him. He got his money. But then you have Kevin Zeitler. It's a one-year deal. I think the base salary on that deal, if I'm not mistaken, it was reported yesterday, $6 million on that Kevin Zeitler deal. Look, I would have brought Kevin Zeitler back for that money. He was making about 9-ish, 8-ish million with the Ravens last year. In terms of his salary, it was a 3-year deal. I think it was around $23 million, so right around that $7 to $9 million range for him. I would have probably taken Kevin Zeitler back. Really steady veteran, really solid in pass protection. His 3 years in Baltimore ranked inside the top 5 in pass protection. But again, maybe this is just a signal the Ravens do want to get younger on their offensive line. They do want to get more athletic on their offensive line. I'm personally not panicking right now because we haven't really had a ton of time to think about it, right? The Ravens haven't had a ton of time to make moves either. So in my opinion, this is a situation that we haven't given it nearly enough time. The Ravens, their offseason, it's not just a week. The Ravens aren't a team that usually goes out there, spends $75 million in the first week of the offseason when free agency starts. That's just not who they are. And I think it's better to judge, at least I think it's better to judge personally once we get past the draft, right? And once we start to kind of get into a situation for Baltimore where, look, they might be a little bit undermanned right now. It might be a little bit difficult to envision what their vision is right now, but we're not talking about a team that is going to suit up and play tomorrow. Tyler Linderbaum is one of the best centers in the league. Ronnie Stanley hopefully is due for a bounce back season, but then you have 3 spots. And I think that ideally for the Ravens, what they would like is some of their young guys already on the roster to step up, like a Ben Cleveland, like an Andrew Voorhees, Salah, Daniel Faalele. But that doesn't mean they're not going to be in the market for a veteran. The guard market is very rich right now, as I mentioned, with John Simpson getting that $9 million per season. That's a lot of money. And for the Ravens, they have to kind of shift how they're building their roster, and we can have conversations and all that about how the Ravens built their offense with Lamar on his rookie contract and the weapons they surrounded himself with. But the reality for the Ravens right now is that, look, they're in a spot right now where the quarterback was on a mega deal, and that obviously changes the way they do things. So they couldn't pay Robert Hunt 5 years, $100 million. Honestly, John Simpson, as I just said, was really rich. Even a guy like Damian Lewis, who also went to Carolina, that was 4 years, like $53-ish million. That's also really rich. So the Ravens, they understand this draft class. A lot of people understand this draft class is one where you can find really quality offensive linemen. Once we start to get into training camp, we have a better idea. Then I think it's okay to say, yeah, you know what? I'm concerned about this position, that position. And we can say, hey, I'm worried about Ronnie Stanley coming back and performing well. I think a lot of people have that mindset. A lot of people are happy with the contract restructure, but he's going to be able to play through a full 17 games this season and play at a high level. Obviously, hopefully the playoffs are added on, I guess, to those 17 games. But that's a big conversation point. But in terms of, the Ravens don't have guys to play three positions, the Ravens don't have any veterans or this, that, and the other, I'm not ready to have that conversation yet. Of course, we can put a bunch of hypotheticals out there about who it's going to be, who the Ravens are going to draft or sign, or is it going to be young guys? Is it going to be veterans or they're going to bring in? But there's just such a wide range of outcomes for the offensive line. It makes sense if you're worried about it right now just because they don't have players, but it's a whole nother conversation if this was the group that they were going into the season with. And I assure you, it is not going to be the group they're going into the season with. They're going to probably draft an offensive lineman really high up in this year's draft. They're probably going to sign maybe one veteran for just depth in general. And then from there, I think you do feel a little bit better and obviously hope for a leap from Ben Cleveland, hope for a good Andrew Voorhees preseason and training camp to maybe take that spot in his first NFL season. Or maybe you get a Daniel Falele who surprises you and you can start at right tackle. But I would anticipate the Ravens taking advantage of the tackle class, maybe drafting a mid-round guard. I expect this to be an offensive line heavy draft for the Ravens. We're going to see how it plays out for them. But again, in terms of, it's already time to panic because of the offensive line, I understand if the group right now is not to your liking. I get it. I mean, I'm there too, where I think if the Ravens went into the season with the group they have right now, clearly not good enough and not experienced enough. And even if you take experience out of it, if you get a really quality player in the draft, again, you just need more bodies there. And so this group in particular, yes, you cannot go into the season with it, but we're so far from that point right now. So I'm not willing to hit the panic button or get uber concerned about it right now. Of course, we can have the conversations about the current group, but it's not going to be the group they're going into the season with. So I'm not overreacting to that personally, but I do understand, again, if the group is not to your liking right now. We're going to be back here in our second segment of Locked On Ravens talking with Mike Sando of The Athletic. Stay tuned for that conversation. We'll be right back here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings on the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts, your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. Well, a person need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Also, items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you on this Wednesday. We talked about the Ravens offensive line a little bit in the first part of the show. I forgot to mention the moves the Ravens made. I'll mention those quickly here at the top of the second segment. Baltimore re-signed Arthur Millette, really solid slot corner for them, to a 2-year deal. So good for Arthur Millette for getting that multi-year extension. Played really well for Baltimore. Look, they lost Ronald Darby. I expected one of Darby and Millette to come back. I thought it was going to be Darby, but I'm not at all mad with the Arthur Millette signing. Gives you some nickel depth in the slot if you're Baltimore, with Ardarius Washington in there as well. Maybe Pepe Williams steps up, but Millette giving you a very solid veteran presence in there. And then the Ravens actually brought back linebacker Chris Board. If it sounds familiar, it's because it is. He played, obviously, as an undrafted linebacker for the Ravens. Big special teams guy, still one of the better special teams players in the league. We know John Harbaugh loves his special teams. So Ravens making a couple moves yesterday. Got a little fancy with the spices with it. But still, Baltimore has a long way to go this offseason, and we here on Locked On Ravens are going to now dive into a conversation with Mike Sando of The Athletic. We'll do our first part in the second segment. We'll get to the final part in the third segment of the show. So first, let's get into the first part of the conversation with Mike Sando. Joining me now from The Athletic, it's Mike Sando, who covers the NFL and does a great job at it. Mike, I appreciate you taking the time, talking some Ravens with me. And free agency, I think, has added a bit of life back into the fan base after how the year unfortunately ended for the Ravens in the AFC Championship game. How did you view Baltimore's year last year? They were the best team in the NFL regular season-wise, but obviously that's not the main goal. And while they did advance further than they had in a while, they just couldn't get over that hump.
I just think it's a terrible missed opportunity when you're that dominant. I mean, they were historically dominant during the regular season. I had done some research at one point. It was something along the lines of, the point margins against teams that were, I believe, 3 or more games over 500 was like the best in the history of the league. Like something like out of 2,700 teams, this Raven team, was like number one. So I always think when that happens, it's extra crushing to not go to the Super Bowl or win it because you just don't get those chances again. You just don't have that team again. I've seen so many teams, the Jim Harbaugh 49ers. They lost a home game to the Giants in the championship game. Remember when they fumbled around in the special teams and lost? That was their team. Okay, that's when they had all of those guys ready to go. And it took a whole nother incarnation to even get back there and not win it. So I really think it was just a epic missed opportunity. I wish I could soften it and say, oh, they're fine. But I mean, you just don't get to have that team that many times.
No, and I think every team is different. So you're right, where they're not going to have that team again. It even started almost a week after with Mike McDonald going to the Seahawks and then losing a bunch of coaches. And then they've lost a lot of players too. But I think a lot of people, when they look to the hope side of things for the Ravens, it is Lamar Jackson. And whenever you have Lamar, you have a shot, is what people say. But obviously for Lamar, the playoff record hasn't been as wonderful, and the playoff success hasn't been there for the most part for Lamar. He has had moments, but obviously the record would say otherwise. What do you see out of Lamar, especially, regular season, but then in the playoffs? Is it just a different mode he gets into where he just can't get over the hump? Or what is that shift from regular season to playoffs where, again, Lamar has his moments, and I don't want to put all the blame on him, but obviously he plays a part.
Yeah, well, I think earlier in his career, he clearly wasn't ready as a passer to just do what you sometimes have to do in the playoffs. They'll reduce you to that. And so I thought that was probably a limitation in his game earlier. And then just their style of play was so not into that they didn't really have the reps of in the passing game against the really good teams when you had to throw the ball. So that was part of it. I think they made really good strides on that last season. They changed their style of play, but maybe lost a little bit of their identity in the end. I do think that as Lamar Jackson evolves, they evolve the offense. And remember, this time last year, they hadn't even signed OBJ. So this offseason isn't over either. But I think that there's a proper calibration for this team to make sure that you don't lose too much the threat of Lamar as a primary runner. And I think that is such a dynamic that is to be reckoned with. You can't have it be everything. Because I do think when you get against, some of the better teams or some really good defenses, that's not going to always win the game. But man, it needs to be a fear factor still to really maximize what he can do. It doesn't mean he can't pass the ball, because he clearly can. But I feel like if you're going to make him be a passer, then he's just another passer. Like, he's a good passer, but there's 15 good passers in the league, right? So where's that line of, look, he's not going to be so great as a passer that we're just going to pass our way to winning all the time. He's going to be good. But how do we make sure that the designed run identity isn't lost, even though you don't want to do it all the time? It's just got to be there. It felt like it wasn't to the same degree for whatever reason when they needed it. And I think the going and getting Derrick Henry is a little bit of a reaction to it.
Yeah, I think when you run your running back 6 times in the championship game, after that was your identity. The Ravens, they hired Todd Monken to be more creative in the passing game and open up some of those concepts. But by and large, the Ravens are a run-first team, and then you see them kind of shift away from that completely in the championship game. You bring in Derrick Henry, you cannot leave him on the bench in a game like that. What was your reaction to that signing? Because there's been a lot of conversation, Mike, about the value of the running back position nowadays and just how people shouldn't pay running backs. There's data to back it up. I mean, Isaiah Pacheco, the past 2 seasons on the Super Bowl champion Chiefs, has made about $700,000 each year. Were you a fan of the Derrick Henry signing? What element do you think it adds to the Ravens' already really potent run game?
It probably makes them a more dangerous team finishing games. You know, there's a lot was made of the fact over the last few years that they've blown 11 fourth quarter leads. Well, part of that is bad, and part of that is because they've had more fourth quarter leads than everybody but Kansas City. So I think they had 41 fourth quarter leads, and there's something like 30 and 11. Still, those 11 losses are more than we're used to them having. It's their win percentage when leading in the fourth quarter is below league average the last 3 years. So now you have a player who maybe can help you lean on people late in the game. No one wants to tackle him at any point in the game, but late in the game, he's a great finisher. So I think that could give them that. He is one-dimensional, right? I mean, when he's on the field, you're not so worried about him as a receiver. I don't think he's necessarily going to completely, be a dynamic 3-down player for them, but you've got to be able to use him in conjunction with Lamar Jackson to really drive teams crazy with the run threat. And then that maybe does help you in your passing game too. Because I do think a huge part of football, always, forever, is just presenting a credible threat of a run. That's the whole key to the Shanahan offense.
Yeah.
It's not they run on every play, but they get into formations and use personnel that makes you think they might run, right? So that's always been a huge part of the Raven identity. I think Derrick Henry enhances that threat.
And to me, I think also, it all starts up front for an offense in terms of the offensive line and being able to block. Now, Baltimore's gone over already a very big transformation this offseason. 3 starters are already out the door in John Simpson, Morgan Moses, and Kevin Zeitler, we learned on Monday, signed with the Lions. So now they're going with Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linderbaum as their 2 from last season. And then they have a bunch of young guys like a Ben Cleveland, Andrew Voorhees, etc. But then you also look to this draft class, Mike, and it's a very strong tackle class in particular, very strong offensive line class. Are you expecting Baltimore to go on a bit of a youth movement here on the offensive line, trying to get younger, trying to get more athletic? Or do you think there's maybe a veteran or two that they could sign and try to extend that window in terms of having guys who have been there and done that on their line?
Yeah, I think there are those players available for them. I think the Ravens, as much or more than any team, are not a team you judge on March, whatever today is, right. March 19th. I mean, like I said, last year they signed OBJ, I believe, on April 13th or something like that. And they've consistently hit in the post-free agency market on veteran players. Some of that will come down to how the draft falls for them. If they don't, get a tackle they like or an offensive lineman they like, then you maybe go that other route, which, like I said, they've been great at being able to do that later in the process, out of the compensatory pick equation window, and find some guys. So, look, we knew they were going to have a ton of turnover this offseason. I do think it's worse than normal. I do think they're a little bit more vulnerable than they've been, but they've also shown a good ability to kind of realize that your team doesn't have to play till September. So there's other ways to build your team. I think the veteran market, they're not done in at all.
I would agree with you there. And one of the things with the offensive line too, Mike, is a lot of people were shocked last year at just how it played out for them with them rotating their tackles last year, which is something that's very unconventional. It hadn't really been seen before, especially using that formula in the playoffs, where both Ronnie Stanley and Morgan Moses had their fair share of injuries last season, and then they came back. But then it would be Ronnie Stanley and Moses start the game, and then they'd rotate in Patrick McCary for a series, and then Daniel Faalele would come in for 2. Have you ever seen something like that before, used so consistently?
It's a great question. I haven't done the research, but no, in my 25 years of covering the league and longer than that watching it, you don't really think of there being platoons on the offensive line in this era. I mean, you go back to the old messenger guards who were running the plays in from the sideline, but we're certainly not in that realm.
Yeah, I think with that too, it's so interesting because I think with the youth movement, Baltimore is going to try to prioritize younger athletes on the offensive line, but again, trying to balance that in with veterans. But you also mentioned, Mike, the Ravens and their losses. They had such a stacked free agency class. Now they were able to bring back, I think, the prize of that in Justin Madubuike. And for him, he got that 4-year deal. just shy of $100 million. And I think the timing of from Eric DeCosta was a godsend based off of what Chris Jones got and what Christian Wilkins ended up getting. How important was it for the Ravens to get that deal done before those two guys, especially considering now they have Lamar on this bigger contract and it just kind of changes how you do things contractually and building your roster?
I think it was huge. And look, you don't take these things for granted. We know there was a lot more history and dynamics with the Lamar situation, but that dragged on a long time and made people nervous, for a long time. So I think it was great to have just kind of get back to normal. I really feel like that's what's happened to the Ravens. They were really kind of not themselves there for a while when they were sideways with Lamar, and there was potential decline happening. And I feel like they sort of got their deep breath and they're sort of back to being a little bit more of a normal organization. That was a big deal. It was a big trauma for them. And, it really came out of the COVID stuff too. They really had a disruption of their processes, I think, for a while there that was maybe a little bit underrated. And I think they've kind of gotten back to business and back to normal now.
Lots of great insight there from Mike. And coming up in the final part of the show, more Ravens talk with Mike. Stay tuned. Lots to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney, whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. UVA did not put together a good performance last night trying to get into the tournament. Well, I guess they technically did get in, but trying to play their way into the next round there. I don't know who I'm picking yet. I'm doing my bracket literally this morning before the actual play starts, so I'm excited about it. Pick Purdue last year did not go well for me. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet college hoops until they cut down the nets. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still here talking Ravens football with you. Really appreciate, again, everybody for tuning in today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, subscribe in audio form as well. Really, really value both our audio and our video community here on Locked On Ravens. We've built up something really special. It's meant the world to me, and I can't wait to continue talking about this team for the long haul. But let's continue our conversation with Mike Sando of The Athletic, talking more Ravens football now. What's made, you mentioned the COVID year, so incredible is a lot of that 2020 draft class, like Patrick Queen, Matabike, Geno Stone, even guys like J.K. Dobbins, who we've seen flashes from, they didn't have a normal rookie offseason where everything was virtual for them. They were going through virtual workouts, and they have ascended where we saw the flashes, but all of a sudden now they're earning bigger contracts, and especially on the defensive side of the ball, they've lost Patrick Queen, they've lost Geno Stone, Ronald Darby also, who played really well for them as a rotational corner when Marlon Humphrey went down. There's a lot of turnover on that defense, including Mike McDonald. And the big thing with that here in Baltimore is that, Zach Orr comes in, really well-respected coach, high-energy guy, and has been a part of that Ravens system both as a player and a coach. But that's a first-time play caller. Is there any concern with you? There's sure to be some growing pains within that. I think Orr's potential is there, but there might be a couple growing pains along the way.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give John Harbaugh the benefit of the doubt because he's continually found guys. But I think a lot of those guys that have been found, had skins on the wall too. They were kind of guys you've heard of before, and that they've really done a good job of plugging in. McDonald was not. He was somebody who was homegrown, and I think the track record there gives you some hope. Still, would they have ideally not had to make this move? Yes. Is there a risk that it's not going to be as good? Yes. With the other things happening on the roster, does more of it maybe shift onto Lamar? Yes. Welcome to the club of the paid quarterback, right? So I think there is a transition period there where some of those pieces that knew were really strong just probably aren't going to all be as strong. And that could be one of them, even if it takes a year or two for him to get up to speed with, by the way, maybe less talent.
Yeah, there's talent still in the defense with Roquan and Kyle Hamilton, Marlon Humphrey, but it's how will Trenton Simpson fill in for Patrick Queen? Can they replace a Ronald Darby? And Eric DeCosta, I give him all the credit in the world for how he worked last offseason to Kyle Van Noy. You mentioned, Mike, how the Ravens offseason kind of goes on and on and on. They signed Kyle Van Noy during the year. Week 3, he was on his couch. He comes in, has 9 sacks off the couch. Xavier Clowney comes in right before the year. He has 9. Now, in terms of what the Ravens still need this offseason, I think offensive line is where everybody's kind of penciling in the Ravens for right now. But do you see any other areas you think they need to attack, whether it be a week from now, a month from now, or even we're talking about in the draft?
I don't off the top of my head, but that's usually just for me because in covering 32 teams, I'm not that granular. I'm looking at some of the more bigger decisions and things involving the coaches or the quarterbacks or, some of those big dynamics. So I haven't dug in yet. I'll do that a little bit more as we get into the draft, I think. I think the draft is really interesting, but takes a lot of time to get caught up to
Yeah.
speed. So you probably know that. What do you think they need?
I mean, look, it has to be offensive line. Corner is obviously there as
Yeah.
well. I mean, you look at the wide receivers. Zay Flowers is the only wide receiver on this roster under contract past the next season. Bateman has
Yeah.
a fifth-year option. They haven't decided that, though.
Could OBJ come back?
He penned a farewell a couple days ago. He hasn't signed anywhere, at least the time we're recording this. But I think what they did is they chose between Aguilar and Beckham. They might sign a Josh Reynolds type and then draft a guy.
Yeah.
So Odell wasn't worth $18 million in terms of his production, but the leadership was there.
Well, I think they also made a statement to their quarterback last year by signing him. I think that's a little bit of what their Derrick Henry move isn't necessarily a statement to Lamar, but it's a statement to your locker room. He said there's just certain guys who have a little bit of juice to them through their reputation. But I think that Odell Beckham had something left too. I think he was better than I expected him to be, and I think he has something still to offer. So yeah, maybe the fit's not going to be here, but maybe there is someone else they can get, in that vein.
Yeah, Lamar said, bring me DeAndre Hopkins, bring me Odell Beckham. Those are guys I'd like to play with. And the Ravens said, you know what? Even though you're not under contract yet, we'll show you that we want you here, and we'll go get you one of your guys. So I think that was, you talked about that statement, 100%. I think the Ravens did that with Lamar. And now moving on to what you think this Ravens team's ceiling is for next year, Mike. A lot of people in Baltimore, Super Bowl aspirations, they want to get there. Do you believe in Baltimore as a contender next season, especially knowing they still have Lamar and hopefully some improvements are on the way, despite maybe the loss in talent in free agency here?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, I think they'll be back in the playoffs and a threat, but they've kind of reached that point with Lamar where, it's a little bit like Dallas has been there, right? Dallas has one of the absolute best records in the league the last few years, but we're really sort of measuring Dak and Mike McCarthy by what happens now in the playoffs. We're not so much measuring John Harbaugh that way because he has a history of playoff success. He's won a Super Bowl. But I think this group together with Lamar is measured in the postseason right now. Fair or not, that's just the way that it is. So if they have a 12-5 season, I think people go, okay, right? You've raised the bar to where now you do that and people don't even think it's a big deal, even though it is. So I think it's going to be measured by what happens after that. And that's just where you get when you've had success.
Right. They've proven it in the regular season. They've proven they can get there. They're proven a solid team, but now it's what matters in the playoffs. That's the goal. you want to win in the playoffs. So
they've earned that right to have the bar held super high, and really nothing they do impresses you now until they're in the championship game. And even then they got to go to the Super Bowl, right? So we keep moving those goalposts, but they've kind of earned it too.
The regular season is important just to, catch your stride, get into the playoffs, but that's when the real season begins. Hopefully the Ravens can get there. Mike, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for hopping on. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on. I know we're kind of in the busy season now of free agency going on.
Yeah, well, at The Athletic, you can find me. I wrote a column today looking at the Kirk Cousins index. It was taking my 10 years of quarterback tiers results, comparing it to guys' salaries and saying, wait a minute, who are the guys who are kind of ranked a little lower as players making a ton of money? Of course, we know Kirk Cousins is on that list. I got 10 guys over the last 10 years, so including Joe Flacco is on there as well, somebody who did really well for himself from a financial standpoint. So that's one thing. I also record every Friday for Saturday on the Athletic Football Show. We have the Football GM podcast with me and former 3-time GM and NFL Executive of the Year, Randy Mueller. Randy's money on the evaluations. I'll give you one example. When we did the draft a couple years ago, he always has things like this. We'll get to like the tight ends, and he said at the time, he goes, Isaiah Likely's my top tight end in this draft. No one was talking about Isaiah Likely, and I was like, oh, okay, I filed that away. Well, yeah, he's a pretty good player. So I love Randy on that type of stuff, especially this time of year because he does the film work and is super qualified to do it. So if you check us out on Saturday mornings on the Athletic Football Show feed, hopefully you won't be disappointed.
All the links to Mike's work in the description below, especially if you want to find that next gem like Isaiah Likely. Be sure to check it out over there. Mike, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for hopping on with me. Really appreciate Mike for giving us some time and for him giving us his Ravens analysis as well. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Again, one more time, be sure to subscribe, follow along, audio form, video form, the whole 9 yards, 4 or 5 days a week, plus more of Ravens content. Coming up tomorrow, of course, more Ravens talk. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.